Hello and welcome to the Maths Guide, and today we're going to be looking at rounding. And when I'm talking about rounding today, I'm going to be talking about counting in tens or hundreds or thousands, by which I mean I'll be counting like 0, 10, 20, 30 rather than 0.7, 0.8 and things like that. So counting in tens, you're going 10, 20, 30, 40. And where this comes from is when we were looking at converting from hours and minutes to hours. And for example, when we were asked how many hours 2 hours and 6 minutes was, we had 2 plus 6 divided by 60, which gave us 2.1, which was fine. But here's another example. If we were asked how many weeks 10 days was, we had 1 whole week, and the leftover part divided by 7 gave us 1 plus 3 over 7, gave us 1.428571428, and so on weeks. So there was a whole lot of decimal places, and we were kind of wondering how many decimal places we should include, which we'll look at in a while, but first we're going to start at looking at whole numbers. So measuring time and speed. If you were asked how fast you were traveling in a car, you would usually look at the speedometer and you'd say something like, we're going at 50 kilometers an hour or 60 kilometers an hour. You would never say that you're traveling at 50.238348 kilometers an hour. And often in maths, students will give answers with all these decimal places. And I'd like to have a look at why you would never include all those digits. In particular, let's have a look at that 2 at the end, the red 2. And to give you an idea of what those values would mean, I'm going to take some pictures from this website, and they'll help show the different values like kilometers and meters, and why you would never give all those digits when you were saying that the distance was 50 kilometers. You wouldn't say it was 50.238348 kilometers. So here's the kilometer scale. You can see that we've got a couple of Titanics would fit in there. So 50 kilometers would be 50 times that circle. At the meter scale, you could fit maybe a couple of basketballs or a beach ball, or maybe half a person would fit into a meter. At the millimeter scale, you could fit maybe the head of an ant or a couple of dust mites. And if you can see that orange line point there, that's the smallest possible thing visible to the human eye. So the digit 2 is the smallest possible thing roughly that you can see with the human eye. And to include that measure of distance, when you're talking about 50 kilometers or 50, maybe like 150 times the length of the Titanic, it's ridiculous to include the smallest possible thing that you can see. So we tend to round to something more reasonable. So looking at speed, generally when you look at your speedometer, you'd say something like 50 kilometers an hour or 60 kilometers an hour, meaning you count in tens. So you go 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on. And whichever you're closest to on the speedometer, that's what you say. So when do I say I'm closest to 50 or closest to 60? Let's have a look at a picture that represents a speedometer. The red arrow there is clearly closer to 50. If we're counting 40, 50 or 60, the blue lines, we can see that the grey lines are halfway between 50 and 60. So that red line is definitely closer to 50. So there we are, we're at about 52 or 53, and we'd round that to 50 if we were counting in tens, because it's clearly closer to the 50 mark. See how far away it is from 60 there. In the speedometer in this point now, it's just about hit that grey mark, and the question is, when it hits that grey mark, when do you decide that you're going to switch from being at 50 kilometers an hour to 60 kilometers an hour? And I put a couple of values into Excel to round it to tens to show you what Excel does with this. And those values are 52, 53, 54, and then as soon as it hits 55, then it's when it switches from being rounded at 50 to being rounded at 60. When can we say we've passed the halfway point? Well, we can see 54 is definitely closer to 50, 56 is definitely closer to 60, but why do we pick 55 to be closer to 60? Let's have a look at a zoomed in approach, which you might not be able to see in the video. In this one, I'm counting the decimal points. So I'm going 54.1.2.3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 54.9 switches to 55.0. So the 54.9, let's zoom in a little bit closer to this. The 54.9 is closer to the 50 mark, we can see that. The 55.1 is closer to the 60, we can see that as well. It's definitely past the halfway, so it's closer to 60. Before that's the halfway, it's definitely closer to 50. When do I decide when I'm past halfway? Well, what I do is I decide I'm working at 54.8, 54.9, and then at 54.5.0, when you tick over into the next digit, I decide there, where I'm starting the 55s, that's the point I consider to be closer to 60. So as soon as that ticks over to the 55, that's when I say I'm closer to 60. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. We're going to round the following values to the nearest 10. So that means I'm counting in tens. Let's have a look at these values. 378, well, I'll be counting 370, 360, 370, 380, and I think I'm definitely closer to 380 there. So the value I'm going to give, rounded to tens, will be 380. What about 384? Do I think I'm closer to 380 or 390? I think I'm definitely closer to 380. So again, I'll say 380. What about 385? Well, as I said in the last picture, as soon as that 4 ticks over to a 5, then I'm going to tick over from 38, 380 to 390. Again, with 994, that's definitely closer to 990. And just one to watch here, when you go from 997 and you go up to the next value of course, in counting in tens is 1,000. So your answer rounded will be 1,000. What about if my value is 3? Well, I'm counting in tens, so my options start at 0. I can go 0, 10, 20. And clearly here I'm closer to 0, so I say 0. So that's how you go to round values to the nearest 10. As soon as the digit after the one you're interested switches from a 4 to the 5, so when it goes 384, it's 300 rounded to 380, and then when the digit after that goes to 5, 385, then you round up to the next value. So have a go at that. Always, whether you're counting in tens or hundreds or thousands, whatever the digit after the one you're interested in, so if we're counting in tens, we're interested in the tens digit, we look at the digit after that, and as soon as it switches from a 4 to a 5, that's when we round up to the next value. So have a go at those questions, and the very best of luck.